Okay, and I'll be sharing the whole screen again. And you guys know what I'm going to do first. I'm going to take the Unit 3 folder that we did on Wednesday, and I'm going to duplicate it to create my Unit 4 folder, and then rename my root directory within it. So let's see here. Modules, and let's see, let me close the other. Close this one here to make sure there's no confusion. There we go. Okay, so here are the modules that I've been doing the demos in. I'm going to take Unit 3 and duplicate it, and then rename the duplicate Unit 4. And then actually, I mean, I've got this as a wider folder in case I need to put other stuff in here, like, I don't know, lesson plans or who knows what. So my actual root directory is inside of here, which is this guy. And I will rename that last name Unit 4. I'm still getting some submissions. Like I've started looking over the last week's submissions. I'm still getting some submissions that do not include your last name. Please do include your last name at the beginning of your root directory and the zip file that you submit. Let's see, in a couple of cases I'm getting RAR files, which I can open a RAR file, but you guys got to be aware that when you work on a team, or especially if you're working directly with clients, a lot of them will not have any idea what to do with a RAR file. I mean, they will be completely helpless. And if you try to tell them, oh, just download this application and then you'll be able to open it, they're not going to want to do that. Trust me on this. Like 8 out of 10 clients will just flat out refuse or will freak out to the extent that they just can't. So for that reason, I'm asking that you guys, if you submitted a RAR file, please resubmit it as a regular zip file, just because that's what clients are going to expect. Okay, so here is the Unit 4 directory, and once again, for at least up to the midterm, I think we can continue just working on the same set of files that we started with all the way back in Unit 1. Someone was asking on Wednesday, I think, hey, when are we going to get around to doing the CSS? Yeah, I know we were going to do that like in Unit 1, weren't we? And it keeps getting pushed off and pushed off here. All I can say is we will get to it when we get to it. It's not that critical for this particular class. This class is all about JavaScript. And we are going to need CSS when we do the project for the second half of the semester. And in fact, we're starting it on Friday of next week, a week from today. So in that case, yeah, we will be working with Vue and pulling data from third-party APIs, and then we're going to need to format it in some way. So at that point, if not sooner, we certainly will get to it then. So not to worry. I'm going to take this index.html. Oh, the other thing that I've seen on some submissions is using something other than this directory structure. Please use this. I'm going to be opinionated about this for right now. Just go ahead and use this exact directory structure, or at the very least have CSS and JS subfolders and have your JavaScript inside the JS subfolder. I've seen 2 or 3 submissions where the JavaScript file is just kind of floating out here with the HTML file. You don't want to do that. If it's a case where you've duplicated a file, so like you started out with it out here and then like, oh wait, Bispo said to do a JS subfolder, so you made the subfolder and then copied and pasted the JavaScript file in here, but then you still got one floating out here in the root directory, get rid of the duplicate. That's the kind of thing that can really confuse development teams. Okay, I'm going to open the index.html file in Chrome, which is my preferred development environment, at least at the beginning until I start troubleshooting. It's not going to let me open it. Come on, let me. Thank you. And Control-Shift-I will open up the console. Looks like we're spitting something out to the console already. And I think we'll be able to do this stuff just continuing to work in the index.js file. I don't see why we can't do that for right now. We may do, let's see. Yeah, okay, that'll be fine. So I'm going to open up, go to the JS subfolder. I'm going to open this up in, let's see, hang on, once again, let me close this guy. Open this up in my coding environment. And here's all the stuff that we were doing before in Unit 2 and Unit 3. I don't think that I need to get rid of any of this stuff or comment any of this stuff out. Let me just see. This is like the console is already grabbing this value 16 from somewhere. This is one of the nice things about the console is that it'll let it know what line of what document it's looking at. So this is line 26 of the index.js file. So if I go over here and take a look at line 26, there it is, console.log square 4. You could leave it if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and comment mine out just because I don't want to be continually distracted by it. But whether you comment that out or leave it in there, it's totally up to you. At this point, mine is getting long enough that I am going to give myself a little comment here and say this is Unit 4 statements. Or you could say Chapter 5 statements or just Unit 4 or anything like that. So let's go ahead and start with conditionals. So we're going to do an if else, if, and then we'll do a ternary operator statement. And you guys, I know that these exist in pretty much all C-based languages, if not all of them. So you guys have seen these before. I'm just going to say I'm going to declare a new variable called username. And this is going to be very common, right? Very often you have users who have logged in. So you have a username, and then when someone offers their credentials, then their username gets stored in a JavaScript, like local storage or something like that. In this case, we're just going to say let username and not give it an initial value. So this would be like if no one has yet logged into the page here. And let's say I'm going to do a conditional here. So it's starting with the if statement. In JavaScript, at least, the if is going to be followed by parentheses, so the condition goes in here. This is one of those things that I forget to do a lot. I just always wanted to be able to start saying if this. I think that's from my days of typing in Ruby, even though that didn't last very long. Ruby is just such a beautifully logical language. It's mapped onto the English language very well. And there's not a whole lot of punctuation stuff added that's unnecessary. But in JavaScript, you got to put the parentheses in there, and then the condition goes in here. So this is the thing you're testing for, right? The condition that's inside the parentheses. Let's see, did I hear a question or anything? No, okay. If you guys have a question, ask it out loud, because some of the little notification things, I don't know what they mean. Or actually, hang on, I just saw this. Oh no, we were talking about that. Okay, cool. Yes, I know, thank you. Okay, so the condition goes in here, and this is just an expression that gets evaluated to either true or false, a Boolean. And if the condition, if the expression evaluates to true, then the code within the code block that follows runs. And if it evaluates to false, then it does not run. So we could do something like if username equals, and this is another big mistake that gets made a lot. Notice that I just typed in a single equals there. Everyone is susceptible to this mistake, but doing a single equals, we talked about this last time, single equals, this is an assignment operator. So let's say I say, yeah, I'm testing to see if a particular user, Bob, is logged in, because Bob is the admin, I guess. So let's say if I say if username equals Bob, like this, what this does not evaluate, this does not check to see if username equals Bob, this sets username to Bob. And so basically the expression inside these parentheses will always evaluate to true, and then you'll have a situation where every single person who logs into your website is named Bob, and they are all admins, which is of course not a good thing. So watch out for that single equals thing. The double equals is the equivalence, and then the triple equals is the strict equality. So let's say if username equals undefined, we will go ahead and set username equal to something else. So username equals, and here are the single equals, and let's go ahead and call this person John Doe. I think this is an example right from the textbook. Not parenthesis, a semicolon after this statement, but not after the if code block. And then let's just save that and pop over to the browser. If you haven't yet opened up the console, go ahead and do so. And then refresh the page, and then just try typing in username. And username now equals John Doe, because that condition was met. Just be aware, when you're using the triple equals here, you have to be very, very exact with your value here. So This one is undefined. It's not like null or something like that. If I type null here, which it might be very forgivable to think, oh yeah, this is null. It's like null value. But I go over here and refresh and then type in username and I don't get anything here. So if you need to find out like what is the value of something right now, a good way to do it is the way I just did it, is just type it into the console and hit return and it'll let you know what the value is. It'll return that if it even has a value. So you could do, what if you're not sure? Like maybe it'll be undefined or maybe it'll be null. Well, you can do more than one of these. You can use like an OR operator and say username equals undefined or username equals null. Okay, but what if username might be an empty string instead? Like maybe you don't even know any of this stuff. So an easier way to do this is to check for falsiness. Check to see if the value is falsy. And that is just put like use the not operator here, if not username. And that should cover all of those conditions that we just talked about. It would be whether it's null, whether it's undefined, whether it's an empty string, whether it's zero, negative zero, null, any of those things. And it'll work the same way here. Go over here and refresh and go up to username and there we get the John Doe. So that is the first and simplest of the conditionals. I'm just going to comment this out and type it a slightly different way, just so that you guys know that you can go a little bit simpler with this. So here's the multi-line comment. And it's actually going to be exactly the same statement. It's just I'm going to do it on one line instead of on the 3 lines with the code block, which you can do in JavaScript. You can do if, starts out the same, right? If not username. And then instead of doing a code block, just type the stuff that goes in here, especially if it's just a single line. Just do it like this. Username equals, this time I'll do Jane Doe, like this. So if it's just a simple one-line thing inside the code block, you don't actually have to type the code block. You could put these brackets around here if you wanted to. And this would work exactly the same way as the previous example. But if it's on one line, you actually don't even need to do that. You can just go ahead and do it like this. So let's test it out. Save it, go over to the browser, refresh, up arrow to username, and there we go. There's Jane Doe. Do you have to do it like this? No, you could just do it like this if you want to. But this can be convenient sometimes. Okay, so that's a very simple if statement. We'll do an if-else statement now, which is still really classified just as an if statement. But basically you do like, the first part of it is the same, like if username, if there's no username equals John Doe, and then you put an else statement right after that with another code block that says if yes username, then do something else. Basically, that's what the else means. So we'll do something else with it. Let's say let messages, like this. So imagine that Jane Doe or whomever has logged into this website, and the first thing they want to do is see if they've got any messages, any new messages, right, since the last time they were here. So we want to give them a notification of it. So let's say like let message equal, and what we'll do is we'll do an empty array literal. Remember, this is how you do an array literal. You can just type in the square brackets. An object literal is with the curly braces. And this just said, so this would be the case if like there's no new messages, then it would be an empty array. And then if there are new messages, then they would be added to this array in using one technique or another. So let's go ahead and do our if-else statement. Now sometimes when I'm doing code blocks like this, I don't always do this, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll go ahead and code out the structure, so the logical structure of the outer code blocks like this. And that kind of helps me just figure out, I don't know, just kind of figure out what needs to go into which code block. I don't know, with something simple like this, I probably wouldn't, but sometimes with larger structures especially, I'll go ahead and type in the larger thing, and sometimes put comments in here as well. Sometimes this is called pseudocode, where you just kind of say, yeah, oh, this needs to happen here or whatever. So I don't know, just something to think about. So let's say if there are new messages, we'll access messages.length. So let me go ahead and save this. You guys don't need to do this. I'm popping over to the browser and refreshing. Let's just type in messages. So we haven't really talked about arrays much other than how to create them, and we will do so on Monday. Monday we're going to be learning all kinds of really fun functions on arrays, array methods, which are really awesome, some of which don't exist in other languages. But one of the more mundane is just the length property. So messages.length. And in JavaScript, remember, everything that's not a primitive value is an object. Arrays are objects, but they're special objects with numerical keys, and they've got this length property attached there. Now, if there's nothing in the array, then you get length 0. If there's one item in the array, you get length 1, etc. So the way to test this guy to see if there are any messages here inside the array is just say if messages.length is greater than 0. Then we will give them an appropriate message here. Let's do console.log. Well, so just you have mail or something like that, right? Something silly. You've got mail, I think was what AOL used to do. Now, it's worth noting here that I've got an apostrophe in there, right? So you need to escape it if you're using single quotes like I'm doing here. Or you could just use double quotes around the whole thing. So if messages.length is greater than 0, you've got mail. Or if it's not, give them a different message. Console.log. I don't know, whatever you want. Nothing to see here. So I'll go over here and test it, refresh, and nothing to see here. Okay, right, so we've got no new messages. But let's go ahead and add a message now. So after typing this in and trying it in the browser, after this, go ahead and do, well, let's see, do we need to do it after or before? I guess we need to do it before here. So let's go ahead and add a message here. So there's a couple of different ways to do that. The way that I'm most familiar with doing it is doing like messages.push. This is one of those methods that we will learn on Monday of next week. But the way that we already know how to do it is doing like the square bracket syntax. So messages 0 to add the first message in there, equals, and then give it a value. I don't know. Hello there. So we've just added something to the messages array. If I refresh over here, then now we've got a different message. So there's the whole conditional thing. I know you guys are familiar with it already. So now it's got a single item instead of being empty. Now there's a longer one than this. I'm not really going to go into it, but you know, you can have like if, else, if, and then have more conditions that you do, and you can have as many of these strung together as you need. And then if you've got something that's long enough, sometimes it makes sense to use a switch statement instead. I'm going to kind of skip past that stuff, but I do want to go into a brief example of a ternary operator. So I'm going to comment this conditional out, this whole if-else statement. And let's rewrite this as a ternary operator. I know there is a ternary operator in C++, so you've probably seen it already, but it's very handy and very efficient little syntax where you don't have to write all these big code blocks out. So, and this works really well if you're trying to do the same kind of thing in each of these blocks. So like in this code block, the first one, the if block, I'm trying to do a console.log. And then the else block also has a console.log. And so that means that I can get the console.log outside of the entire thing and put the conditional structure, the if-else, put it in here. So it's just kind of like turning things inside out, skinning something and bringing it around so that the logic works backwards. So here's the way that the ternary operator works. First of all, you do your initial condition, messages dot length greater than 0. Notice that I don't have an if keyword in front of this. And there's no parentheses following the if keyword because there's no if keyword or whatever. Instead of putting if before, put a question mark after it. See, I'm already liking this better. This one already reads more like English to me. Well, I don't know if it's more like English, but at least it's more concise. So if message dot, sorry, oops, spell that correctly, messages.length is greater than 0, then the console.log message is you've got mail. And once again, I'm going to need to do the escape sequence here. If I'm using single quotes, and I am. So this part that we've got here so far is like this first code block with the if, except that we've got the question mark after the condition instead of if before. And then to run the second one here, after this first one here, you do a colon, and then the other thing that you want to do console.log, which is nothing to see here. Like so. And so this one here will accomplish the same thing as this guy up here, more concisely with less punctuation, a lot less punctuation actually, and you can do it all on one line. You don't have to do it all on one line, by the way. If it starts getting really long, and sometimes it does, then what you can do is you can take the question mark and like the colon here and put those onto their own lines like so. And you could even turn this into its own kind of code block with the parentheses if you wanted to. I've seen this kind of thing before, and I've written it this way before. But something this short, personally, I think this is fine on one line, but it's up to you. So this should work just the way this one does. So when we save this and go to the browser and refresh, we should still get the you've got mail. So I refresh, and there it is, you've got mail. And I think that will bring us to the end of the conditionals statement. Again, just to reiterate, there's more to it than this. There's the if-else-if statement, so make sure you read through that little section in the chapter, but I won't go through one right now. Or a switch statement. So any questions so far? Any questions about the conditionals? If you can hear the TV in the other room, sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about that. Is that a question? Let's see. No questions. All right. Thanks, Alfredo. Okay, cool. Let's go on to the next part. So I wish I could figure out how to get that to stop. So this part here was, I guess this is all Unit 4 statements. So this was conditionals here. So let's do loops. Loops are fun. Okay, so I know that you guys have seen some loops in C++ as well, and some of these look exactly the same. The older loops in JavaScript are just C loops, just like they are in C++. So let's do a while loop. We'll start with one of those. So I'm just going to say let count equals 0 to start with, and all we're going to do is we're going to spit out the numerals 0 through 9 to the console, and that's it. So let count equals 0 to start with. You need that in there. And then here is a while loop that will do this. So be very careful when you're typing this. Not guilty, but while. It starts out like this. A lot of the loops start out with a keyword and then parentheses, just like the traditional conditional does, right? So like a for loop, a for in loop, these are all going to have follow the same basic thing. So what this does is it checks for a certain condition to make sure that it's still true. And as soon as it's, as long as that's true, the loop will run. And then when the condition is not true anymore, the loop will cease. And we'll move on to the next bit of code in the script. So here's what this one's going to look like. While count is less than 10. Remember, we're just trying to spit out 0 through 9. So as soon as it gets to 10, we want this to spit out of the loop. Here's the code block that follows. while count is less than 10, console.log count. So starting with 0 and then moving on from there. And then here's the bit. Here's the bit that you must remember to do, because if you don't, if I save this right now and I go and refresh the browser, I will crash the browser. Just with this little piece of code here, I will freeze it up, and then eventually the whole thing will crash. Why? Well, it's going to keep running through this while loop infinitely. It's called an infinite loop. And here's the reason why. Count is 0, right? And that means count is less than 10. So the script gets to here and says, oh, okay, while count is less than 10, console.log count. Okay, it's less than 10. Console, .log count. And then go back and start the loop over again and check again. Oh, is count still less than 10? Yep, it still is. I'm going to do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. It will keep going forever until your whole system crashes. So you must remember to do this guy right here, count plus plus. And this, of course, you guys know about this one. This is shorthand for count equals count plus 1, right? Or count plus equals 1, or just count plus plus. Remember to get my semicolons in there. If you don't, this is the line. This is the critical one, without which you will crash your system. So yeah, is count less than 10? Yep. Okay, I'm going to do this code block. I'm going to log this to the console, and then I'm going to increase count by 1 so that it is now 1 instead of 0. And then I'm going to run through this again. Is it less than 10? Yep. Run through it again. But now each time it does it, it adds 1 to count. And eventually it will get to 10. And as soon as this is not true, as soon as count equals 10, this statement evaluates to false, and then it will not run through the next loop and will spit out of there. So I'm not even going to show you what happens if you leave count plus plus out, because it's not good. It freezes everything out. See how easily you can break everything? It's very, very easy to break everything in JavaScript, especially with these loops. Okay, so I'm confident that I got it right. I'm going to refresh here, and there it is. There's the 0 through 9. Good to go. Okay, did anybody forget to put this in and freeze up their browser? Well, I guess if you did, you won't be able to tell me about it, right? You're frozen. But hopefully you did remember it after all the talking I did. Let's do it again. Let's do the same. We'll do exactly the same loop, right? And it's going to be spitting out 0 through 9 to the console. But just note that, so it's going to be a different kind of loop. It's going to be a do while loop instead of just a while loop. Just note, okay, count no longer equals 0. So if I just say while count is less than 10, the next loop will never run, because this is now 10. It's never going to be underneath that. If you don't believe me, go here to the browser and just type in count. There it is. The value of count is now 10. So running through this loop actually changes the initial value, or not the initial value, it changes the value of count. So if you're going to run through the whole loop again, you have to declare a new variable, call it counter or something like that, or you can just reset count equals 0 again. Notice I did not use the let keyword to restate. I'm setting it to equal a new value here, so you don't use let or var. And let's do the other one here. So this one's going to be a do while loop. So this is what the structure looks like. The stuff that you want to happen, you put in the code block right at the beginning after this keyword do, and then while comes afterwards. But otherwise, it's the same thing. So the stuff that wound up in the while condition here goes down here at the end, and then the stuff that goes within the code block, same thing here. So while count is less than 10, and then inside here, console.log count, and the critical part is still the critical part. You will break your browser just as handily with this as you would have with a regular while loop. So let's go ahead and do count plus plus here. And now if we save this and go back to the browser, we should now have 2 loops through 0 through 9. So let me refresh, and that worked. And I'll save this. Do console.log count, count plus plus, while count is less than 10. I would have thought count equals 0. I thought this would reset it, but apparently it did not. Why is that not working? Interesting. I don't know. The first thing I'm going to do in order to test this is I'm going to go ahead and just, instead of doing count equals 0, do the other thing that I was talking about and just do a new variable, let counter equals 0. And then to put counters in here and see. Counter is less than 10. And refresh, and nope, that wasn't it. It's still not doing it. So why am I not getting this? Did anybody else's work? Am I just getting like, do I have a syntax error somewhere? If so, I'm not seeing it. Oh, what? I see what it is. Anybody else catch this? I have while count is greater than 10 instead of less than 10. And of course, count does not equal greater than 10. It has never been greater than 10. So, whoops. That's what you want instead. And now we'll get the 2. And there they are. There's the 0 through 9, and then again 0 through 9. If you start like testing these things and you're having trouble seeing where the numbers end, you can do other logging to the console. So like above this one, console.log while loop, and then we'll do here console.log do while loop, which I always called the do-wop loop. And then there we go. So we've got, you could even put like colons in there in order to show, yeah, this is what's following. There's other stuff you can do, by the way, too. And it's been long enough that I wouldn't trust myself to try to swing it in the middle of a demo right now. But you can actually, to some extent, you can even format the text that shows up in the console. Like you can make it larger. You can change the color. You can even change the typeface, as I recall. So if you're going to be doing like extensive commenting on something, then that's something that you could look into. If anybody's interested, I'm sure I could dig up some of my old notes about it, but it's been a long time. I'm trying to think of an example I've seen where it does that sort of thing. Let me just open up Reddit real quick. And it might not even show it because I'm not logged in here, but if I go to the console here, and yeah, it's not showing up, but yeah, I'd have to be logged in, I think. But there's like some websites you go to and you look at the console, and then they will have like some ASCII art here, and like it'll say, "Hey, congratulations on getting to our, not our source code, but to this console." Whatever. And some places will even offer you a job. Like Reddit is one of those places. Like, say, "Hey, if you got this far, maybe you should consider applying for a job. We're looking for developers," that sort of thing. So anyway, I'll check that out later on. But for the time being, it's not critical or anything. Okay, so there it is, 0 through 9, and then the do while loop, which got exciting for a moment, also 0 through 9. Now you guys already know about those two probably, and then you know about the for loop as well. So the classic for loop, if you leave out these comments, it's not a big deal. But once having started them, I kind of want to keep going with it. Okay, so this is our special pal here. We will do for, and then declare our variable right in here. I'm just going to call it let I for incrementer, which is the common way to do it. It doesn't have to be I though. You could call it count, you could call it X, Y, L, anything you wanted. So let I equal 0, just like we did let count equal 0 to start these guys here. I equals 0, colon, I is less than 10, colon, I plus plus. Now, if you're like me, the first time you looked at this loop, you did a big like WTH, man, because this is, I don't want to learn anything like this. This is messy. But, I mean, compare this. Well, let's go ahead and just put this stuff in here. We'll just do console.log I. If you're wondering, like, why do I have to learn such a messy piece of syntax here? this is all shorthand for one of these other loops. I mean, look at the size of the do while loop, and then notice that, yeah, this is accomplished on basically 2 lines of code if you don't count this closing bracket down here. This is basically just a more efficient way of kind of cramming all this information in here. So it declares an initial value like, or a variable like count except I, set it to 0, and then this is the part that says while I is less than 10, and then this is the part where it says I plus plus, not inside the code block this time, and then the only stuff you need in here is the console.log. And so save this and go over here and refresh, and you've got a third one that does exactly the same thing. Yeah, while loop, do while loop, and for loop. So in this case, all we've done is just loop through, 0 through 9, the numbers here. But usually what you use a for loop for is looping through an array, or maybe through an HTML collection or node list or something like that. And as I recall, we have an array all ready to go here, don't we? If I just type in A here in the console, yeah, we've got an array ready to go with howdy, 2, 3, and then another array in a multi-dimensional kind of way. So let's do a for of loop. Because this is one of the special loops in JavaScript that is designed to make something like this a little bit easier. Well, before we do that, let's go ahead and do the for loop one more time. I'm going to leave it here, up here, like above this comment here. But let's go ahead and do this exact same structure, except this time we will loop through the array, the A array. So for let I equal 0, colon, right? So starting out exactly the same way. And then I is less than, and this time instead of just giving it a particular number, let's say we don't know how large the A array is, how many items are in it, so we will do a.length, which is the thing we kind of started with, semicolon, and then do the I plus plus thing. And then the code block after that. So what we'll do here is we'll do a console.log, and let's start with I, so that you guys can see what happens here. And I can tell you right now, it's just going to be a set of numbers. Because remember, a.length, the length of an array is just a number, just like 10 is up here. And so the result should look exactly like this thing up here, except that we don't know how many numbers it's going to be. In this case, we knew it's going to be 0 through 9. In this case, it's going to be 0 through some number, right? However long the array is minus 1. So if I refresh this over here, and I don't have a comment to end this, but here's the first for loop 0 through 9, and then we get 0, 1, 2, 3. So that's the array that it's looping through. What happens if you want the actual elements in the array instead of just the numbers? So remember, A doesn't show up. When I just type A, it's not saying 0, 1, 2, 3. It's saying howdy, 2, 3, and another array. How do we get that stuff in here? Well, that is done. I'm going to put a comma here. As it turns out, you can spit out multiple values to the console, just separate them by commas, and sometimes that's very handy, as in this case. So I'm putting I, comma, and then AI, so I in square brackets here. Remember, like A0 will get you the first array item, but in this case, this I is the number that's being iterated through up here in the loop statement. So check it out here. There it is, these last 4 here. So these 4 are the keys or indexes of the array 0, 1, 2, and 3, and then here are the values of those 4 items in the array. And that's what it looks like to get either or. If you only wanted the items, then you could just do this. If you only wanted the keys, then of course you would do what we started out with. If you wanted both of them, then you can do this. So like I said, these three arrays, the while, the do while, and the for loop, these are all, as far as I know, in like every C-based language has these. So let's do some of the same things with this for of loop that's in JavaScript. And let me just show you the simplest syntax. Usually what you use this for is if you only need the values, the items themselves, the elements themselves, and you don't need to get the keys or the indexes here. It looks like if you were doing a for loop and you only needed AI there. So that's where this for of loop really comes in handy. So this is what it looks like. It starts out the same way, for, and then let I, but instead of doing let I equals 0, we're just going to do let I of A. Remember, A is the name of our array. And then we'll do console.log I. So you can see this is quite a bit simpler than this. Even if I get rid of this extra bit here, these two are now equivalent to each other, and I have to type a lot less here than we did up here. There's a lot more boilerplate up here in order to get this thing done. Someone at MDM said, you know what? If this is boilerplate and we're typing it the same way every time, then we really shouldn't have to. So yeah, the for of loop was born. So let's save that and go ahead and try it here. It should show up at the bottom, the for of loop, and there it goes. The howdy, 2, 3, and then the array inside the array for the fourth value there. Very, very useful. This is one of those things that I think I mentioned before, that when a new item shows up in, or a new technique shows up in JavaScript, you got to usually kind of wait for a while before using it, because all the browser vendors have to implement that new technique in their own way, like a new keyword or something like that. They all implement it in their own way, and for a while it's almost guaranteed to be way slower than other techniques that may accomplish the same thing. So like when the for of loop first dropped, it was way slower than the classic for loop. Like a lot slower, to the point where you'd be crazy to use this for any professional work. You used it for your own stuff because it was fun. It's easier to type, it's easier to look at, easier to debug, and so on. But if you were doing something enterprise level or anything less for that matter, just anything professional where speed or efficiency is at all, performance is a concern, then yeah, you'd always do the for loop because it may be ugly to look at, but it's a lot faster. I think that it's not that big a discrepancy anymore. Last time I checked Stack Overflow and so on, people were saying, yeah, we've almost reached parity here. I think that this for loop is still the fastest loop out of them all, but I don't think it's by a whole lot anymore. You guys might want to check your own, do your own research on that. Look up JSPerf, which is just checking performance of JavaScript and so on, and see what kinds of studies have been done on this. When you do, make sure to check the dates on them, because something that was done 5 years ago may not be relevant anymore, but something that's been done in the last couple of years may be relevant. Checking on the speed, relative speed of the same operations but done using different loops. So the for of loop, it didn't give us the keys, right? It only gave us the items. It gave us the elements themselves. Is there a way that you can get both in here? Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've done this, but let's see if I get it right here. Let's say if I'm once again, so I'm putting square brackets around this as if it's an array, which it's not. I'm going to say I for index and L for element, or you can do K and L if you want to. Let's just see what happens if I do the console.log I and L. Let's see if I got it right here. Looping for the array, and no, it does not do that. Okay, so scratch that. I'm going to have to research this and see, because like I said, it's been a while since I've used that technique. There is a way to do it using the for of loop, but it's not the best way, which is why it's been a while since I've done it. The best way, if you need to get the keys and the elements, or even just the keys, is generally going to be to use a different kind of loop, which is, I will do my little commenting system here. This is a for in loop, which I think that one does exist in other C-based languages. So you guys may have seen this one. It's usually used for enumerating through objects, which we'll do next, but you can use it on arrays if you want to get the keys. So basically for of is going to loop through the items, the elements, and then for in is going to loop through the keys or the index numbers. So check it out. We will do for let I in a now, not let I of a, but let I in a. And let's see what happens if we do console.log I. So this is the for in loop at the end, and you can see that it just loops through the keys. The for of gets the items, the for in gets the keys. So if you wanted to get both, like we did here, when we did the for loop, the classic for loop through the array where we got the keys and the items, do it the same way here. Take a look. Here it is, console.log I and then AI, right? The ith of a. Do exactly the same way down here. So I and then a I, like so. So now if I save it and refresh, there we go. So now I'm getting the same thing as the classic for loop up here, and I'm using the for in loop instead to get the same thing. I don't think this is a particularly slow loop, but this is one that I would have to go back and look at some JS-perf numbers and see. I think it's pretty much like the for of loop. I think that the for loop classically is still the fastest, but maybe not by a whole lot anymore. Okay, and that's what we're going to do with arrays. Any questions so far? You guys still doing okay? Make sure to let me know if you have questions, or if you want me to slow down, if you want to see any part of it again, or if you want me to elaborate on anything. I'll do my best. Just let me know. Okay, cool. So we're still going to stay in the for in loop for the moment. Remember, we had this A array, but we also had an object which we named O. And there we go. So we had the 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, and then instead of a particular numerical value, there was a nested object in here. So let's go ahead and do the for in loop, but we will do it for the object instead. If you want to, you can just copy and paste this stuff down and just change A to O in both cases. I'm going to type mine in. Let I, well, first of all, let me just try this. I'm going to do try let I of O, so the object instead of the array. And let's do console.log I and see what happens here, okay? I can tell you right now, this isn't going to work. It's giving me an error, a type error. It says O is not iterable. So that it just means there are certain elements that can be read through in order. Remember we were saying that objects are odd in JavaScript, meaning that there's no set order in which, like, you don't have a guarantee in the order of the properties and values. The properties might be typed into or entered into the object in a particular order, but then when you read them back through a script, they may come back in a completely different order. And I think we in fact saw that on Wednesday. So that's what it means. It's not iterable. You can't iterate through it. But you can do a let I in O. You can enumerate through the properties. Again, as long as you're not expecting them to come back in a certain order. Here we go. And in fact, let's see, 1, 2, and 3. Why are we not getting the last one here? Hold on a sec. Let me refresh again. Oh no, that's right. There's only 3. Sorry, I was thinking there were 4 items in that let the array, but there's only 3. So yeah, 1, 2, and 3. That's what we're getting. And just like when you do the for in for an array, it brings back the keys or the indexes instead of the values. Now, if you want the values as well, you can do it the same way we did up here. Just so I can test it, it might be tempting to do this, or not IO, sorry, O.I. Because remember, when you're calling in, when you're accessing properties of an object, you can use the dot syntax, unlike in an array. So like if I type in O.1, for instance, it gives me that value. If I type on O.2, then it gives me that value. O.3 gives me that value, right? So that works. So I should be able to do this here, right? Let's go ahead and save it and refresh, and it's not doing anything. It's giving me undefined. In fact, I'm kind of surprised. I thought it was going to actually throw an error. It's giving me undefined. So this is one of those cases, and I think I said, yeah, I can't think of an example, but I know there is one. We'll get to it. This is the example. You cannot use the dot syntax if you are reading in like a variable that you don't know the value of yet. And we don't know the value of this until the whole code block gets run. And so that's a case where you can't do I as a dot syntax. You would instead have to do it as an expression within the square brackets. I, like this. And then we go over here and refresh. Now we're getting it the way we expected. So just be aware. I mean, if you're just following the same syntax for both anyway, then you'll be fine. But if you're tempted to try the dot syntax here, that's not why it's not working. In order for it to follow the dot, you need to have like an actual property name here. And if it's a variable or something you don't know the value of yet, then it's got to be inside the square brackets. And of course, the same thing will work out here too. If I do O.1, oi, that works. Or I can do O square bracket, but now I'm going to have to put it in parentheses here because it's an expression, and then we get the same thing. So I don't know, it gets a little bit tricky sometimes, but that's the basics of it. Now let's see, I don't need to do that here. This is going to be breaks of various kinds. So this is how you break out of loops or return values from functions or continue loops. We'll skip a couple things here. We'll skip yield because that's kind of a newer feature in JavaScript, and frankly, I haven't had case use it yet, which doesn't mean it's not useful. It's just I haven't used it yet. But we'll do the others. We'll do break, and we'll do continue, and we'll do return, and then we'll look at a couple of ways to throw errors, and then we will be done for the evening. You guys will be on to lab here. So we're doing pretty good. We're only about an hour in. So let's go ahead and try to finish this up here. So I'm going to start with a simple for of loop, the I of A, just like we did up here. And in fact, let's not do A. Sorry, get rid of that. Let's declare a new variable. I want to say let decades equal, and it's going to be another array. And let's put in some double-digit numbers here. I'm going to put in 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And then I will do let I of decades. This is, by the way, I mean, I'm someone who uses I all the time, but a lot of people would say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. This should be decade of decades, which I get that. That makes total sense. So maybe I'll actually do it like this as well. Either way is fine with me. So let decade of decades, and then, well, let's just start with a simple console.log. We'll log each of these out of the console and see what it looks like. So console.log decade, like so. And then, there we go, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Cool. So let's go ahead and do a break here. So we'll break out of this loop. So sometimes you're looping through something, and then you just want to say, yeah, just if you reach a certain point or if you hit a certain value, then just go ahead and just stop looping. Okay, we don't want to loop anymore after that. So a simple use case here is going to be, I will do it as a simple conditional. Say if decade equals 30, let's say, and then break. So what it does here, it's kind of like it, well, I mean, it is a conditional. It's a conditional inside of a loop. So it's looping through these, and at the beginning of each loop, it just, checks for this condition. Oh, look, I did a single equals. Let's do a triple. A lot of people make that error all over the place. The question is whether you know like how to fix it when it starts throwing things that you're not expecting. So if decade equals 30, then break. Checks for that first, and then if that is not true, then it goes on to the rest of the code block here. So first of all, it's 10. Decade does not equal 30. Okay, so log that to the console. Next up, decade equals 20. False. Log that to the console, and then so on. So let's go ahead and try it here. I'm going to save that and refresh over here and crack it open. And then we only get 10 and 20. Once we get to 30, then it stops. And you don't have to do like the triple equals here. Let's say we do instead, like if decade is greater than 30, break. And that means it'll get 10, 20, and 30 before it breaks. And it will stop after that. So it doesn't loop through the last two. It breaks after 30. It's worth noting that the order in which you put these has an effect on what happens with the result. So if I put in console.log decade before this conditional, then I'm getting all the way up to 40 because it gets up to 40 and logs that before it decides to break out of the loop. Do it the other way, the first way, and then we get only the first three. So that's a break. Let's do another one. This is going to be continue. And once again, you can put in like comments if you want here. I mean, not comments, but log statements. Just separate these out on the console. But I will do another for of, same thing. If we're going to use this one, let's check this real quick. So before doing anything else, I'm going to save this and let this whole script run through, and then just type in decade and see that unlike before, when we were declaring a single value as, like I was declaring a variable with a single numerical value and then looping through it, the value of that number would change on each loop, right? We would say I++ or count++, and would start adding to the number so that we started out at 0, but we didn't end up at 0. And we would have to zero it back out again in order to do anything else with it. In this case, it's an array, and the array is not changing value just by looping through it. You can loop through an array any number of times, doing any number of different things to it, and the original array is not going to be touched. Like a string, same thing. There are some functions on arrays that we'll learn on Monday that when you loop through an array, it does actually alter the array. But in this case, when we're just doing a simple for of loop through, it's not going to touch it. It's not going to do a thing. So let decade of decades again. And this time let's do if decade equals 30, like we did for the first one. And let's do a continue this time. And then we'll do the whole console.log decade. Like so. So what a continue is, it's a way of skipping this step here. So it's looping through decades, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It gets to 30, and the continue says, you know what, jump to the next loop. Instead of like, don't do the rest of this stuff, but break out of this particular loop and then jump to the next iteration of the loop. So what we should get here is skipping the 30. It should go 10, 20, 40, 50, skipping that 30. Let's try it here. Save it and go over here and refresh. And there it is, 10, 20, 40, 50. So that's what continue does. That can be useful to know too. Last one we're going to do here is a return. So a return is not for use with loops, it's for use with functions, and we've already seen it here. In fact, I won't type it in again because it's somewhere upstairs here where we did, there it is, function square, and then the parameter passed in, and then return x times x. So this is just simply a value that gets returned from the function so that you can use the function as a value, within another function or something like that, and it'll return, once everything is through computing, it'll return a static value, right? So we've already seen that one. Let's do a divide here. So instead of times or multiply or whatever, square, that was what let's do a divide. So we'll do function divide. And this one's going to have two variables passed in as arguments or as parameters, because what I want to be able to do when I'm running this function is to type in two numbers and have the first number divided by the second number. So like, let's say I did 20 and 4, and then it would spit out the number 5 because 20 divided by 4 is 5. That's what I'm looking for here. So that's simple here as far as a return. Instead of returning x times x, it's return x divided by y, like that. So function divide xy, and then in the code block, return x divided by y, x/y. Let's save that and try it and see what happens here. So divide, and what was the example? 20 and 4, I think that's what I said. And it spits out 5, right? Now, one thing we should not be able to do is divide 20 and 0, because I don't know if you guys remember your math, your algebra or whatever, but that's one thing that's not allowed in mathematics. You cannot divide a number by 0 because it's like a nonsensical result. It doesn't make any sense, right? And what this does is it gives us infinity, is what JavaScript gives us. And a lot of times that's not going to be really useful. So let's say we don't want to allow this. We just want it to return undefined when that happens. So what I'll do, instead of having this return value be it by itself, let's put a return value in front of this one with a conditional. We'll say if y equals 0, note the triple equals, and then we'll just say return. Now, this is the same thing. When you don't put a value out, like here we put a value after return, right? If you don't put a value after return, this is the same thing as return undefined, like this. But you can just leave it like this. So now when we go over here and try it, I'm going to try the divide 20 and 0, and now it gives me undefined instead. So this is just an example of using return in order to break yourself out of the function. So it tests to see if y equals 0, and if it is, it immediately returns us out of the function. Instead of going on, it doesn't even try to run the rest of it, right? So that's like breaking out of a loop, returning from a function. We're almost done, folks. Don't worry. I'm going to do two more things, and these are going to be different variations on the divide function that we did here. This one we're just using a simple return with no value in order to just break us out of this function. But let's actually throw an error this time. Otherwise, it's going to look exactly the same. So you can just, if you want to, grab this and copy and paste it down underneath, and we'll just change one little thing about it. I'm going to go ahead and type mine over again. Oops, function divides, and I have to name it something else, right? Because I can't use the same identifier. So I'll use divides x and y. And then down here will be our return x divided by y. That part hasn't changed. I keep trying to type 7 instead of y. And up here, instead of returning a value, we're going to throw an error here. It'll start out the same way with the same conditional. If y equals, I better slow down my typing here. If y equals 0, then throw new error, like this. And then in parentheses, you can tell it what error you want to throw. So, I don't know, whoopsie daisy, something like this. Let's go ahead and try it. Save this, go over here to the browser and refresh. Now remember we're doing divides instead of divide now. So divides, and first of all, make sure the regular function is still working. So 20 and 4, and yep, there we go, no problem. So now divides, and we'll try 20 and 0. And there is our error. So notice this is where errors show up, right, in the console. But now we can customize this. So I just said whoopsie daisy, but generally speaking, you'd want to do something a little bit more verbose, maybe a little bit more helpful to teammates, whatever it happens to be, right? But this is how you get that done. The very last one we're going to do, this is another way to throw errors. This is going to be a try catch statement. And the logical structure of it looks exactly like, well, no, not exactly like, very similar to an if-else statement or an if-else-if statement. So in that one here, like back up to wherever it was like, yeah, this guy, I guess, like if-else statement and then the code blocks and so on. But instead of if-else, we're going to use try and catch. Now there's a third one you can put in, which is like the final else, which is finally. We won't mess around with that. I think the textbook has an example. But here is try. So what this is like doing is it's running a piece of code within this code block in the try code block. And then this is what to do when and if you get an error. And this one is actually a function. So try does not get the parentheses, but catch does. And that gets its own code block. And then if there is a finally, then you put it down here and it gets its own code block. So this is the stuff, the code that you're trying to run. And this is where you spit out error messages. And this is the stuff that you want to run afterwards no matter what, whether there was an error or not. So this is that third piece I'm going to skip for right now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to try doing, let's do a console.log. And anything you want to. Something that doesn't take too long to type because, well, actually it doesn't really matter, but we're going to remove these quotes in just a moment. But for now, make sure you put a quote so it's just a string here. And then catch. So what you can do here is within the catch, you can pass in a variable, and then this will be a place where you can spit the error out to the console. So let's do this console.log. And I'm going to do a template literal since we've learned how to do that. And then, whoops, and then interpolate error. So this is just going to be whatever error gets thrown by this, which in this case will be nothing. There won't be an error. It's just going to log this to the console and that's it. But in order to spit out a standard error, then you have to actually pass it in as a variable here and then call it somewhere in here. In this case, I'm calling it interpolated within the middle of this template string. So save this and refresh over here, and it should be fine. It just spits out la la la, right? Now in this case, I'm going to take this whole thing and copy and paste it, because in this case, it's going to be, I generally don't like doing this because I feel like I'm going to miss something, but in this case, there's only one change we're going to make. We're going to remove the quotes from la 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 here. And what this means is it's no longer a string. It's an identifier of some kind, right? Like a variable name or a constant name or a function name or something like that. And we haven't declared any variable or function or constant name la la la, right? We haven't done anything of the like, so we're going to get an uncaught reference error here. And in this case, it's just the error is going to include the word whoops here. So save that, go over here and refresh. There's the la la la, and then here's the second one, whoops, and then it gives us the reference error. La 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 is not defined. So as with throwing the new error up here, generally you want something a little bit more helpful than just putting in whoops, right? Something a little bit more verbose than that. But in this case, I'm just showing the technique, and then that's that. Okay, so I think that we're probably glad we didn't do all that on Wednesday. Well, it would have been a bit shorter if we'd done it on Wednesday. I would not have done the jumps, the breaks, or anything like that, but it still would have been a bit. So we started off with conditionals, right? Here we go. And a very simple if and then if else, which we then rewrote as a ternary operator. And then we did some loops. We did classic while, do while, and for loops, which you guys should already be familiar with if you've taken C++. And then for of and for in. And actually, you're probably familiar with for in as well if you loop through objects like this. And then finally, we did breaks. Actually, this is jumps here. Very kind of jumps. So first one is a break. We broke out of a loop there. We continue to loop. And then return from a function. And then throwing a new error here, and then do it using a try and catch in order to get something similar. So any questions about any of that stuff? That was a lot of stuff, I know. But it's all chapter 5 stuff. Those would be the sections that I put in your reading. 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, 5.5. Yeah, so the first 5 sections of chapter 5. Oh, everybody good? All right, I'm going to stop the recording.